And good morning, everybody. We are live. Congratulations. You made it through the week. Another week of amazing food safety, food quality, keeping everybody safe and giving them the food that they know and love. And a lot of times in what we do in food safety and what takes place in food security and food defense, nobody notices unless things go wrong, but we notice. And Rod and I wanted to say this week, thanks. We appreciate all that you do out there. So if you're new to the chat, pull up a chair. We're going to be talking about the subject here for the next hour or so, and we're going to be having a conversation with you because if you're new to the chat, not a lecture, we're here to share information and make everyone better. And if we can improve things just a little bit every single week and keep building on that, that's our goal. So if you're familiar with the chat, I love it when I have Rod Wheeler on. He is one of the best guys out there and just a fantastic presence in what we do. And if you have anything with food safety, food defense, his company, GFDI, the Global Food Defense Institute, that's the place you need to go. So, Rod, how are you doing today, sir?
Pretty good. Good to see you as always, Brian. You know, we talk all the time, and every week I'll tell you, when I listen to your podcast every week, even on the food safety side, I get so much from it. And I know you're probably chuckling because I've been listening to your podcast for years now. But, you know, you can always find something that you can take away and learn from. Even for what I do in food defense and crisis management, when I listen to your guest that's on here, I always get a takeaway. So thank you. I really appreciate the knowledge that you share and the guests that you have come on, because, again, it just really helps the industry.
Well, thanks, Rod. I appreciate that. Coming from you, that means a lot. So people are filing in here. So Tim and Cheryl, good morning. Morgan's here as well. Awesome. So one of the things that we love to do here on the chat is list out where we're at, as everybody's doing here already. So I'm in Loveland, Colorado. We're going to have a beautiful fall day. Where are you at today, Rod?
I'm in Upper Marlboro, Maryland, right outside of wonderful Washington, D.C., your nation's capital.
Nice. I have a friend who's taking a course out in D.C. this week, and him and I were chatting on the phone last night. One of the things I love the most about going to D.C. is the restaurants are amazing, amazing food in D.C.
Yeah, we got some real good restaurants in DC. You got to check them all out. But you know what? Let me just give you this quick little tip. Ask the locals the best place to go. The locals will always tell you. Don't always go to what all the surveys say and all that and TripAdvisor. That's good. But when you call the locals and say, what's the best place I can get a good local steak or a good local hamburger? We got some real good hamburger joints here in DC. And you got to ask us. We'll tell you where to go to get the good food and the good price food too.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's a great tip. So Stephanie, wow, awesome, good to see you. You have some new faces here in the chat. Always good to see that. So as we go through the chat, for the new people here in the chat, if you have questions for us as we're going through this, we want to incorporate those into what we're talking about. So throw those in there. Rod and I can see all of the comments. So if there's something that we think we can work into the conversation, we'll list it up here. Also, you'll notice in this as well too, people have conversations amongst each other as well too. Back to Rod's point, this is a forum for sharing information. So go for it. So as we start the chat here today as well, Rod, tough week as we're recording this. A tough week here in the United States. Of course, 9/11, the 24th anniversary of 9/11 this week, which was yesterday. Terrible situation that happened in our country. And then the assassination of Charlie Kirk the day before. Horrible event. Someone murdered essentially for stating their opinion, and someone didn't like it and took their life for it. And I think it just reemphasized, and I know I thought about this a lot as we were getting ready for this, Rod, just the importance of security and what you do. And we need to reflect on this and look at this with our companies and plants as well.
Absolutely, Brian, you're 100% spot on. Unfortunately, it's just the world that we live in today. You know what happened to Charlie Kirk and then the representative out in Minnesota, the school shooting that they recently had. I mean, we see more and more of these things occur. And so, we have to do our due diligence. All of us do, in trying to make sure we keep each other safe and secure. And there's things we can do collectively as a nation, regardless of your political persuasion. We got to look out for each other. And when I heard about the shooting of Charlie Kirk, the first thing I thought to myself is, wow, have we gotten to that point now where a person can't even express their own views without worrying literally about being killed? I hope we haven't. But again, we have to look out for each other. And that's why, again, podcasts like this one, this is all we do. When we share information on podcasts like this, you know what the goal is? To look out for each other and to share information that maybe someone can use to stay safe and secure.
Yep. Well said. Absolutely. So let's all join together in a drink of our favorite beverage, everyone. Cheers. Ah, very nice. So with that, Rod, one of the things that we've been doing here on the chat, and we'll change the tone here a little bit. We don't want to be too somber here today, is the dad joke. Are you ready for the dad joke?
Oh, here we go.
Well, I mean, it was kind of a weird situation, right? All these things happening this week. So over this last weekend, my wife loves Scrabble, and so we were playing Scrabble, and so we had the board set out on the floor, and as usual, I was getting my butt kicked by her, and it came time for dinner. And at that point in time, I'm like, okay, well, we'll take a break here from the game, and we'll go get a bite to eat. So we went to the counter, and we weren't really paying attention, and our dog Noodle got into the game and ate the tiles. And so, of course, my wife, extremely, she's distraught, very upset by all of this. So we took Noodle, we went to the veterinary emergency room to get him checked out. So, of course, x-rays in the works, Rod. And that's not cheap, right? So, walked out there, $1,000 vet bill.
Yeah.
And got some, the good news is that Noodle's going to be okay. And the vet gave us some advice going out. He said that we really need to keep an eye on him. And especially the next time he goes to the bathroom, because we need to pay attention to that, because if he does, it could spell disaster.
Now, was that an original joke or an original dad joke, or did you find that somewhere,
The embellishments are mine, but I found that online.
Only you can find those great jokes. We have to laugh too. I'll tell you, laughter is part of healing. Laughter is part of therapy. It really is. So I'm kind of glad that even though we talk about some serious subjects here, we still find a way to laugh and.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm looking through the comments here with the mass shooting here in Colorado, and you never know. And so Cortland, a good friend of ours here on the chat, so one of his clients' son was shot at the school shooting here in Colorado. Terrible, absolutely terrible. So sorry to hear that, Cortland. That is just awful. I have a good friend whose brother was killed in the towers at 9/11. Wow. Sorry to hear that. So thanks for sharing that, Cortland. I'm glad that you did. So with this around security, I think, Rod, right, this was extremely relevant to what we're talking about here today, and it's around immigrations and custom enforcement. We're seeing a ton of activity around this with the government and going in and doing things. And there was a video that caught my attention. This is kind of new for the chat. I wanted to play this quick little video for everybody. It's only a minute or so long, kind of showing what was going on. We all saw in the news this raid of a Hyundai battery facility in Georgia, where immigrations and custom enforcement went in. And one of the things that I noticed in here is this looks exactly like a food plant. This could be any of our plants. Looks exactly.
He's coming this way, please.
Wow. Well, I think 300 people were arrested or detained.
Yeah, I think it was 475. Again, this was just only about 2-3 weeks ago, right down in Georgia.
And you can see they're armed. These officers are armed.
Yeah.
Wow. Chains. Wow, ankle chains.
So you have you got an operation there, Brian, that's not only federal authorities, but you also have your state authorities and your local authorities combined. That's what we call a task force, and they're out there and, what they're doing. And I know that's the subject of our chat today. There's a couple of ways, though, that you have to look at that. And I know people see that, and there's been a variety of, responses online, on social media, folks with their opinions about that. But there's a couple of ways to look at that. But for our purposes, for the food industry, and I think this is so important, we have to look at this in a way whereby how can we, if something like that were to happen at our plant, How can we make it a positive experience? There are ways, and we'll talk about that here. There are ways we can make this experience a positive experience. It doesn't have to be a negative thing. Let me just first start out, though, Brian, by saying, these I-9 enforcement actions are not new. These things have been going on, believe it or not, for decades. We're getting a lot more attention to it now. The law has been the law since, I think, 30 years with I-9 verification. E-Verify, a lot of people recognize it as E-Verify. And the government has done these types of audits or inspections for years, believe it or not, under multiple administrations. This just did not start with the Trump administration. This was going on way back when Clinton. And I remember some food plants back in the late 90s, as a matter of fact, early 2000s, that were subject to same types of inspections by individuals from the ICE, from Immigration and Customs Enforcement. So the first thing, and I think the first takeaway that I would love for our listeners to get from this is that what we see here is not necessarily new. What is new is the refocused attention on it, I think, is new. It's a lot more in the media these days, but these inspections are not new. And this is what they're doing is under the color of the law. So just keep that in mind. I think that's the first thing to look at.
Right. Now, so part of this is a lot of us, especially in the food safety and quality assurance world, Rod, don't have your background and expertise. So one of the things that Jose Sabal has always taught me on this chat is starting at the beginning and understanding the reference points. So with ICE, as an organization, so we hear the acronyms and these all get thrown around. Government loves their abbreviations. Who do they report into? What are can they only operate in the U.S.? What's their authority within those areas?
So ICE operates under the auspices of the Department of Homeland Security. Ultimately, all of the federal government agencies fall under the DHS, Department of Homeland Security. So that's who they report to, and obviously DHS reports to the president. ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, customs inspection officers, custom officers have been around forever. They used to be more focused on the borders. Now, because of so many things going on around the world, so many threats going on around the world, we're really kind of laser focused on the domestically here in the United States. Who are the individuals in the country? And there's a reason, I believe, and again, this is just my opinion, there's a reason why I think you see such a focus by ICE agents here going into food plants and other types of plants like we saw with the Hyundai plant, conducting these investigations. What is that reason? Some of your listeners may be asking. That reason is because there was a report, and this is so important, folks. There was a report that came out this past February from the Department of Homeland Security. It was called the National Threat Assessment Report. That report is available on DHS's website. Please, if you get the opportunity, read that report. It's open source. It's free. If you go to dhs.gov, it's the Homeland Security Threat Assessment Report. That report is really interesting because a month after that report was issued, the director of the FBI went on national television and said, we have a lot of threats that we're receiving domestically here in the homeland. And the reason we have these threats is because of all the unstableness that's going on around the world, of course. But there's organizations, and I'm not just talking Al-Qaeda, I'm talking other organizations, terrorist groups around the world that has focused and has said they have their sights set on the causing harm to us here at the homeland in the United States. I mean, that's documented fact. And if you'll read all about this more in depth, if you read that report. And I think that's one of the reasons. Matter of fact, I know that's one of the reasons why you see organizations such as ICE focus so heavily on who's here in the country, because we do know that some of these individuals are here on the homeland, in the homeland, and they're probably plotting their next move against us here in the United States.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, bad guys are patient, if nothing else. They're going to find a way. It's just like food fraud and all these type of other things that we worry about. So these functions then with ICE, Rod, so these are structured under federal. Are there any state agencies that handle this type of activity?
Absolutely. So you have state agencies that work along with ICE. Some states push back. for political reasons. All of it's about politics. But
Yeah.
ICE operates under the flag of the federal government, as we know. They do work in conjunction with a lot of local authorities, local police, state police, but you do have some states that don't want to cooperate as much with the federal authorities. I think mainly for political reasons. Who knows the reasons they don't want to cooperate? But at the end of the day, ask yourself this question: what is the goal of all of this stuff? What is the goal? The goal is to identify those individuals that are here, and we know they are here, that's planning and plotting their next strike against the United States and the homeland. We don't have enough time in the day, Brian, you and I, to go over all these things that's happened around the world. I mean, if you just start thinking about some of the terrorist attacks that has occurred in other countries, every time I hear about a terrorist attack, remember the Bataclan, that attack that happened at that nightclub about 3 years ago? When I hear about things like that, the first thing I think about is the United States.
Yeah.
Is this, are they planning this same type of an attack here in the United States? We don't know. We believe they are. Just like you and I are sitting here talking today with our listeners, there's groups domestically here in the U.S. that's plotting something against the United States. So what do we do about it? We have to share information like we're sharing now. We have to identify individuals that may try to surreptitiously gain access inside of our facilities to put some deadly contaminant into a product to harm people. Could that happen at your facility? How many times, and I'll let you ask the question in a minute, but how many times have we turned on the 6 o'clock news, folks, and something major has happened that day, and the first thing we hear people say when they're interviewed is, we never thought this would happen to us. We hear it almost every day now. These days, we hear it every day. Could that happen to you? I do penetration tests at food facilities, and I don't do it for fun. A penetration test is when you gain access to a facility to try to illustrate and show a company's leadership where their weaknesses and their vulnerabilities are, right? I don't do it for fun, but it saddens me, believe it or not, when I can gain access inside a food facility and walk around to where you have large batches of food product being made or mixed, and no one even recognizes me. In 2025, that should not be happening.
No. Well, and I think, and that's a great way to put this, Rod, too, because number one, here's what I took out of what you just said, is we can't wait and rely on other people to manage our safety and security, just like food safety. You're responsible for your facility. You're responsible for making sure that the people who are in that facility are who they say they are and that you can trust them. And if just like in food safety, we have FDA and, they go and audit and inspect facilities. No, right? They're the backup. They're the check. They're the people that come in after something happens. The front line is where that responsibility lies. Food safety, security, it's no different.
You're 100% spot on. And you know what? And that takes me to my second bullet point here. The first one, as you know, I mentioned, look at this whole situation differently, right? The second bullet point is that reach out, and I said this in my podcast last week when I talked about ICE inspections, reach out to your local and your state and maybe even your federal ICE inspection office. Find out who those folks are in your area before they reach out to you, because it makes a difference. It really makes a difference, folks. When you reach out, and you can call those folks and say, look, I'm calling from ABC Food Company. I just want to make sure, we're doing everything we're supposed to be doing. Can I get some assistance? They would be more than happy to assist you in terms of providing you with information that you can use, making sure that none of these bad guys that we're talking about finds their way into your facility. So reach out to the ICE inspectors. They'll be more than happy to come out and work with you. I think it's always better to reach out to them first before they reach out to you.
Yeah, and that's just human nature. If you're working with someone who knows who you are, that relationship is always off to a better start.
Absolutely.
If FDA or ICE or anyone comes to your facility and they don't know who you are from Adam, they're going to assume the worst. So if they have a prior relationship with you, that's always the better way to do it. Now, can ICE or groups like this who are looking at this type of information, because if we look at it from our viewpoint as a manufacturer, Rod, so you hire someone, you go through the interview process, you offer them a job, then the next step is the paperwork side of it. And HR will ask for, hey, we want your driver's license and these type of things. Can these type of agencies look at your processes and say if that's sufficient or not to making sure you're vetting people properly?
Yes, they can. And they will if you ask them. Now, they don't have to ask you. They can actually get a warrant. And they don't even need a warrant, actually, because the law gives the government the right to come in and inspect your I-9 verification forms and things of that nature, typically through E-Verify. There's a lot of systems and support that companies can use. You know, you talk about HR. HR is so critical when it comes to working with immigration agents. And I've worked with food companies, Brian, for years and their HR departments. And we've actually literally invited folks from ICE, from the FBI, to food plants to begin this relationship. And you find it works very, very well. So HR is a critical element and component of your overall food defense and security of your facility. The other thing I do want to mention, though, while we're talking about hiring of employees, and again, this is really, really important. 60% of those individuals that were taken away out of the 475 of that Hyundai plant, they came from a temporary agency.
Oh,
now, this is interesting. And why is this interesting? Well, I'm glad you asked. The reason it's interesting is because I've been talking about this for the food industry for at least 10 years. Yeah. I've said that the best, if I'm the bad guy, and if I'm the Osama bin Laden of 2025, and I want to get into a food facility and harm somebody, the best way for me to do that is to come in as a temporary worker. Why is that? Because what I find from doing multiple vulnerability assessments for years, companies, we hire temporary workers and we get these temporary workers from temporary agencies. That's where the vulnerability comes in. Temporary agencies don't do typically the right type or a more extensive type of background check before they hire these individuals. They just don't do it. Why? Because it's too costly. But they're quick to send these individuals to work at our facilities. We take these individuals in. So check this out. When I do a vulnerability assessment and I know for a fact that this company is using temporary workers, you know what I sometimes do? And your listeners will find this interesting. Some of them already know this. I will try to get into a plant as a temporary worker as I'm part of the temporary agency. And you know, it works every time. I would say, yeah, I'm with the temporary agency. Oh, okay, go right on in. You see the vulnerability there? Think about that, folks. And I have access to large open batches of product. All I need is a small vial or tube of some deadly contaminant, pour it over into the pasta sauce, and off you go. Is it really that easy? So my whole point with saying that is that we have to really make sure that if you are using temporary workers, and I'm not saying temporary workers are all bad, I'm just saying that's a huge vulnerability in the food industry, how they can get into a food facility. Make sure your temporary agency sends you, don't just tell you on the phone, this guy is okay. Make sure they send you written documentation that this person has gone through a background check that you, the company, has required. Written documentation is what's going to save you when you have that ICE inspection. See, because when ICE arrives, if you say, well, we get our temporary workers from a temporary agency, they don't care about that. They're going to say, well, where's the paperwork showing that these people are legitimate? Well, the temporary agency has it, but you're the one hiring the employee. So keep that in mind, folks. That could save you a lot of money. And you know, the penalty or the fee is $3,500 per person for each person that's not properly vetted through E-Verify. And if they find them working unlawfully in your facility undocumented, $3,500 a person.
Yeah, let's do some quick math there. How many people? 400 people at that Hyundai plant times 35. That's some bucks. Now, I mean, so part of this, so a couple really good points in what you said there, Rod. And this is something in food safety that's very important too, is test your systems, right? That's why we audit. And a lot of times we'll get resistance in what we do. Oh, we're fine. You know, we've been doing this for years and everything is great. But what I love about what you're doing with these vulnerability checks is you're showing them that it's a false sense of security. Well, you guys told me it's a system was bulletproof. Guess what? Here I am. I'm in your plant. What do you say now? Right? And they're like, oh, okay, yeah, we need to fix that. Now, part of this too, with that video we just showed with Hyundai, is it wasn't the temp agency that got in trouble. What was it? The headline is Hyundai plant. It wasn't temp company.
Exactly.
Hyundai plant. It's their reputation that's being dragged through the mud, just like a food recall. So challenge, right? And so part of this, and this is something that I preach on a lot as well, is if you're in quality assurance and food safety and you're working in a production facility, you're part of the management team. Oh, well, I kind of do my thing and I'll let HR do they. No, your job as part of that management team is to challenge and to make sure that what you're doing is effective. The plant manager relies on you for that. You have to be responsible and ask these questions.
Absolutely. And someone needs to take ownership of that. And that takes me to my next nugget, which I think is, again, another takeaway here. I recommend to my clients all the time is to put together what I call an immigration kit. And what that is you keep all of your I-9 forms and a record of all of your individuals that's gone through proper vetting and working in your facility. Keep that in a separate folder, if you will. Identify who these individuals are and verify who these individuals are so that if, in fact, ICE does come to your facility to pay an inspection visit, automatically bring out that immigration kit. Not only that, put a team together in advance. And the team could be your food defense team. It could be your crisis management team. These are the individuals on your immigration response team. And these individuals, your folks, right, at your facility, have all been trained in terms of what their responsibility is if, in fact, there is an inspection at your facility. You will find if you just do just those two simple things, put together that kit and put together an immigration response team. You can call it the IRT. I don't know if folks like acronyms. Call it the IRT unit. I don't care what you call it. You'll find, though, in all seriousness, you'll find things will be a lot more easier if, in fact, you do find yourself encountered with ICE.
Right. And do like we do in food safety and quality assurance, do an audit, pull random records from that, call that agency and say, we're checking on these. We want to verify that this information is all still true.
Absolutely. And it's the same thing with food defense. With food defense, you need to do your audits anyway to make sure that, your measures are still working at your facility. That could even be part of your food defense audit if you wanted it to be.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point. I was going to talk about that a little bit too. Is one of my rules in my plants was if we had to use temp workers, because it's fact of life, you have cyclical businesses and companies. And if you get to the busy part of year, it's like, oh crap, we need 10 extra workers to get through this busy point. Okay, fine. Right. You have these processes like you're talking about in place, Rod. But what I would always do was, to your point, number one, is they were always supervised. They were never allowed to do anything on their own. And they only worked in functions within that facility where the food was already packaged. So for example, they would be stacking boxes on pallets or cleaning a warehouse or something like that. Never were they allowed anywhere near open food.
Yeah, that's, I wish it could always be like that. Unfortunately, that's not always the reality. You find temporary workers working in some of the most critical areas of a food plant. And, I was at a plant about a month ago. It was a dairy facility. And, at dairy facilities, they have these huge tanks full of product, pasteurization tanks and things like that. And they all open on the top. And it's product in those tanks. And typically you have to go up on a mezzanine in a dairy facility to get to the tops of those tanks, right? It's usually a mezzanine. One of the questions I always ask folks that have a setup like that is, who's allowed to go up on top of that mezzanine where you can open up those tanks from the top? And they always look at me like, well, everybody can go up there. We only really use maybe 2 or 3 employees up there, but there's no restriction as to who to go up there. So then I would ask the question, so if I'm a temporary worker and I gain access to your facility, nobody's around, and I know these are the pasteurization tanks. So I know all the butter, all the milk, all the dairy is going to go through these tanks. If I could just go up this little stairwell, dump something in, who would know it? But here, take it a step further. You don't even have to be a temporary worker. All you have to be is a contractor. I'm here to service the vending machines. Look, I'm here to service the vending machines, and I find my way up a mezzanine to the pasteurization tanks. No, who's to stop that person? Here's the last point. How do you identify temporary workers in a food facility from your regular employees? If you have, let's say you have about 100 or 200 or more employees and you walk through a facility. If you were to walk through a facility today, Brian, and let's say you had a company uniform on that you got off of eBay that you can get, right? who would stop you? If you looked official, even if you put a hairnet on and you just walk through like an inspector, who would really stop you and say, hey, who are you? Or would they say, hey, where's your badge? Where's your Velcro armband? Would anybody really stop you? That's a question that you have to ask yourself.
Yeah, that reminds me of a couple YouTube videos. There's a couple that I've seen where at sporting events, people will put on an orange vest and then start directing traffic so that cars stop so they can leave. Right? People just assume authority.
Right.
There's another video I saw online where if you just have the right attitude, a lot of times it can get you in places. So there was a guy that went to a fast food restaurant and acted like he worked there. He acted like a boss. He came up to the counter and said, hey, how you doing? My name's Brian. What's the revenue looking like today? Oh, it's looking pretty good. Great. Hey, let me in here to the side. I want to see the fryers in the back. Oh, okay. Right. Instant access just because that person put on the air of authority. Crazy how that works.
I mean, I could give you, we'd be here till this time next week with stories I can share with you where that has. The bottom, we have to be one step ahead of the bad guy. The bad guy is always planning his or her next move. Trust me, they are. And that's why, when you look at, and again, not to criticize law enforcement with the Charlie Kirk situation, but from a law enforcement perspective, my background, the first thing I thought about is crowd control and how do you monitor these large crowds? I mean, there's things that you have to do, and it's going to come out, they're going to do an after action report with the Charlie Kirk shooting. My first question, though, was why wasn't there drones monitoring the rooftops of those buildings all around it? Anytime you have a large gathering like that, you have to monitor the rooftops of surrounding buildings. We learned that the hard way with Mandalay Bay years ago when all those people were, remember that? When all those people were killed out there in Vegas? We learned that the hard way. And that was in 2009, 2010. Why wasn't those rooftops being monitored by drones? It's very easy to do. It's not that costly. It wasn't done. Again, not to criticize, but we learn from these situations. Now, I want to take some of those same best practices, though, to food facilities. We know a whole lot as far as how to protect food facilities. And there's things companies can do. It doesn't have to, crunch the budget or anything like that. There's things you can do. And a lot of it, believe it or not, are operational things, whether it's working with ICE and other agencies, the FDA, FBI, local police, or even if it's just certain little security measures that you can have in place that will help reduce your vulnerabilities at a food facility. But we have to do these things, folks. Don't wait. And you've heard me say this probably 1,001 times, Brian. Don't wait until the plane crashes to say, what are we going to do about it? It's too late at that point. It's too late.
Exactly. So, I mean, to kind of summarize that then, number one, right, we're always making sure our food safety programs are constantly up to date. Same thing here. To your point, Rod, the bad guys are looking for the easy target.
Sure.
Make your facility a hard target. If that temp worker is in your facility with potential ill intent and is looking around and he looks up and sees that camera, all right, that may be enough to stop that from happening. So make sure that you created a hard target. So I want to transition now, Rod, to the actual process itself. So like that video, you're sitting in your office and you're the quality manager at this battery plant for Hyundai, and you see armored vehicles and big SUVs and helicopter. There's a helicopter in that video coming at your plant, and they're knocking on that front door. What is the mechanism? What takes place during that process? What does it look like? What is ICE going to do?
Yeah, they're going to come in. They want to talk to a plant manager or someone in leadership, individuals that you should already have had identified. From what I just talked about a few minutes ago, you should have already identified these individuals. They're going to say to you what they're there to do, whether it's an I-9 e-verification audit or inspection, or they have information that there may be undocumented workers working at your facility. Look, ICE is not going to just come in randomly just to search. They're not in the business of doing that. Usually there's a reason why they target certain facilities. It usually is. Either they got a tip from someone, and people call in tips all the time, or they got something that they verified and corroborated where there may be undocumented workers, or something that you may not know is that maybe they have information that some terrorist group or someone associated with the terrorist group may be planning something against the product the best way to get in and identify those folks is to quickly do an I-9 verification search. And then that's when you take the whole team in. So when they arrive at your facility, you want to welcome them. I mean, you don't want to push back and say, why are you here at my plant? You don't want to do that. You want to welcome them. Well, come on in. What information can I get for you? You have that kit together, that immigration kit that I talked about a few minutes ago. Make that process very smoothly and let them do whatever they do. Now, they're going to present you with a notice of inspection. They always have proper documentation, or they should. And 9 times out of 10, they will. They may even have a warrant. If they have a search warrant from a judge or a judicial officer, you have to acknowledge that. And that gives them the right to confiscate any documentation that you may have that may be of or related to your employees, especially when they're trying to identify whether or not people are here legally. Keep in mind, the best way to protect the company, though, is to just cooperate with, don't push back so much. You'll find if you don't push back so much, it won't be as bad. Cooperate with the authorities. Again, they're there to do their jobs and try to facilitate their visit so that they can get in and get out without much fanfare.
Well, and so at this stage in the process, I want to reemphasize this so everybody is getting this message, because Rod, you're fire hose of information here, which is awesome. Is really the first thing that's going through my mind, Rod, is this parallels an FDA inspection, right? So FDA shows up at your plant, announced or unannounced. It sounds like ICE has a reason to be there. You may not know they're coming, but they have a reason, as opposed to a generic inspection where FDA is just kind of checking up on you. They're going to show up. They're going to flash your credentials. They're going to say why they're there. You need to be walking through the scenario and say, okay, all right, this federal agency is now in my facility. Where do I take them? Do I have a conference room that is set up where I can meet with them? Who within the company needs to be notified that ICE has arrived at the facility, right? So your boss is going to need to know for sure. What about the company lawyers? What about the CEO? What's your method of communication? Who else needs to be involved in that? So let's say that your head of HR needs to now get on a conference call. You need to work through these scenarios to make sure, and to your point, which is absolutely, if people take one thing away, have files ready to go. Have it. The last thing you want is to try and rifle through all this stuff, and you're trying to get the temp agency on the phone. To your point, they're going to start shaking their heads just like you're doing, right? It's like, all right, these guys don't know what the hell they're doing. And then their actions against you are going to go up. It's just like anybody else in life. If you are compliant, if you understand what they're asking for, if you're able to give them the information quickly that they're asking for, they're going to be like, okay, all right, these guys know what they're doing. My comfort level with them has just improved a little bit. Let's get through this and make sure things are going correctly.
Exactly, Brian. I was at a food plant out in Fresno maybe about a year ago, and we had just completed their vulnerability assessment and written food defense plan. Lo and behold, true story, lo and behold, the last day I was there, an FDA inspector made an unannounced visit to this particular plant. Well, I was there, and the first thing I did was joked with the inspector. I said, have they given you all a raise yet? And he kind of laughed about it, but I did that to break the ice a little bit because I felt like with the company, it was so much tension there. And I just made this FDA inspector feel so welcome. I said, well, we're glad you're here to support us because that is your job, right? And she said, yes, it is. And it was just a good visit. And she looked at the food defense plan. She said, I don't need to read this. This looks perfect. And we talked a little bit. She was only there about a couple hours. And then she said, this place is great. Bye. And she left. It was really just that simple. And I'm not saying it's always going to be that simple. I know some of your listeners may be saying, I wish it was just that simple and easy. I know it's not. But my whole point is when you don't push back, when you kind of welcome these folks in, when you have a plan in place before they arrive, just like you said a minute ago, Brian, you'll find that experience is completely different than what you expected.
Right. And so here's something, Rod, that I always emphasize here on the chat is all good processes follow 4 steps. Plan, do, check, act. And this is exactly the same. So ICE walks into your facility. Okay, Mr. Wheeler, we're ICE and we're here to evaluate your facility. Awesome. We'd like to see your procedures on how you vet and evaluate your employees. Absolutely, Mr. ICE agent. Here's our procedures. Do you have any questions? Let me know. No, this is looking pretty good. I also now want to see your records, right? I want to see how you check people. Have you found any issues? Yes, we have in the past. We had some documentation that wasn't quite correct. Here's the corrective action process we went through with our agency to make sure we were getting everything correctly. Would you like to see some of those? Yes, I would. Bam, bam, bam. And within that, inherent in that, something else I teach as well, Rod, is you have to be able to tell your story. Don't count on that procedure to talk for you. You need to explain to them why you do this and why you don't do certain other things. And to Allie's point here, right, you're also protecting your employees, right? You're giving them a safe environment. You're protecting your fellow employees, because imagine if you're working in that plant, you want the comfort that the people that you're working with are who they say they are too. So you're helping to protect everyone.
Absolutely. And I think at the end of the day, that's the whole goal of this whole ICE enforcement thing that's going on, is to protect people. I mean, that is the goal. It's not to shut companies down. It's not to embarrass companies. That's the least thing from their mind. The goal is to protect employees, your brand, protect your brand and protect your assets. And that's why I believe they do a lot of what they do. Again, I've never really looked at ICE inspections as being a negative thing. You know, there's another company in Chicago, maybe about 4 years ago. This was all on the news. 300 employees was taken out of a food plant right outside of Chicago about 3-4 years ago. Some of your listeners may remember this because it was all in the national news, and it was an ICE inspection. And this was under the, I think it was under the, had to be longer because it was under the Obama years when this ICE inspection took place. And it was an E-Verify inspection. It was the same thing then that they're doing now. Again, I think now it's just a lot more emphasis on it because the federal government has really focused on that aspect of it. But again, these things have been going on for years. My point here is that if we're prepared for it, just like we're prepared for anything else, and, you know, we got all of our measures in place, we have all of our documentation in place. And that's why, again, I'll say one more time, it's so critical that HR should be one of the ones leading this effort. HR knows better than anyone in the facility what's required. Yes. And you have to really be guided by the HR's perspective and their guidance. One other thing that you didn't mention that I mentioned, but you're correct, Brian, is that make sure that you discuss all of these things with your corporate legal team in advance. And then make sure that you have a number for your corporate attorney. If in fact you do, that person should be on your call list. So just like we do in food defense, you got a call out list. If ICE arrives, these are the steps we take, A, B, C, D, and E. These are the people we notify, and these are their telephone numbers. This is all in your ICE response kit that I was talking about, your immigration response kit. So you have all of that information there if in fact something were to happen.
Yeah, and the time to test this is before you need it. If you're trying to run through this when ICE is knocking on your door, not good. Not good. Part of this too, because we're in food plants, you also need to make sure that the inspection agencies, so ICE in this particular, understand your rules. So if ICE wants to go out in the production facility onto the GMP floors, it's like, okay, guys, you may not be familiar with this because you do all kinds of other stuff too. This is a food plant and we're making food for people. There's certain rules that you need to follow when you're in there. And I'm going to show you how to do that. You have to have a hairnet on, you have to wear a coat, you don't touch any food, these type of things. So let me walk you through how those things work. So don't feel like they can just run roughshod through your plant either and just go and randomly ransack everything. Make sure that you're getting that appropriate level. Now, this is going to be depending on the situation as well. So be prepared for those scenarios. Again, be prepared.
Yeah, absolutely. And, like you said, I mean, ICE officers, as well as anyone else that comes into your facility, should be subject to your facility rules, your food safety rules. And if they are going on a production floor, they do need to suit up and do whatever is necessary. And they can't be touching the food and things of that nature. They really should not have a need to do all of that. Now, one other question some of your listeners may have. What if ICE wants to talk to some of my employees? Very good question. Very good question. You know what? You're going to have to discuss that with your company attorney, because I've seen it both ways, folks. I've seen some companies say we don't want our employees speaking with anyone from outside our company, whether it's government or anyone. But then I've seen just the complete opposite, where some attorneys will say we don't mind if they do speak with ICE or anyone else. So you really are going to have to think about that. But here's the thing, folks. Again, I know I've said this 2,000 times. Think about these things now. Don't wait until it happens. It's going to be too late then. Because what's going to happen is when they do show up at your facility, you're going to be scrambling around, like Brian said earlier, trying to figure out what do we do? What do we do? You'll kind of go into a crisis mode which you really should not have to do. You know, you don't have to go into a crisis mode so much so if you have plans for these things. So think about these things now. Do we want our employees to speak with these individuals? Are the employees required to provide identification? Let's say the ICE officer walks up to one of your frontline workers and says, show me some ID. Do they have to show ID? You know, that's a good question. It's just going to depend, I think, a lot on where they're located in terms of the state, even if it's federal authorities. That's why I have to defer you to your company attorneys. I'm not an attorney, so I don't want to say, yes, show ID or no, don't show ID. Something like that is best now to get that answer from your legal counsel.
Right. And exactly. So just like I recommend for people is your in-house legal counsel may not be qualified for this. They are used to reviewing contracts and HR and mergers and acquisitions. They're not an expert in this particular area. So I always recommend in food companies, have outside legal counsel who specializes in food safety and food regulations. It's the same here. You need counsel who understands OSHA, for example. Does OSHA have the legal authority to interview employees? Yeah. Oh, absolutely they do. Do they have the ability to take pictures and gather evidence? They do. Yes. You need to understand these different boundaries. Does FDA have the ability to take pictures? Depends on who you talk to, right? To your point, Rod, it's a gray area. You need to decide on your company how this works. And to your point earlier, it's going to be based on the context. So you need to work through these different things. If I shows up at the front door with a battering ram and they've got a warrant and they've got guns at the ready, you need to understand how serious that situation is and pivot accordingly. But to your point, and we keep reemphasizing this, guys, you have to prepare.
And, you know, the same thing applies to video, Brian. And as you were speaking, I was thinking about another situation I had at a plant in Baltimore where law enforcement showed up at a food plant and they were doing some type of inspection on their own, some type of an investigation. And they showed up at a food plant wanting to confiscate the CCTV footage from a food plant. Now, they did not have a warrant. See, that's a dicey situation. Law enforcement shows up, they want to see your video or they want a copy of your video, but they don't have a warrant. You know, you don't really have to give them or turn that over. But again, that's one of those situations you want to make sure that you discuss in advance. I always tell my clients when I write food defense plans, make sure there's a section in there as to when video will and will not be released. And then who to call in an emergency if you got that question, because you got to be careful with what information you do provide without a warrant, because then it's a consent. If you're consenting to this, that's fine. But then, you know, don't let it come back and bite you, I guess is what I'm trying to say. One other thing, too, I do want to mention, and security guards. And I know we haven't talked about that much on this call, Brian, but I'm actually putting together a 2-day course for security guards for food facilities. Why? That's an area, think about it, folks, that we haven't really put a lot of emphasis in, but that's really our greatest asset with a lot of these things we're talking about. So let's say ICE shows up and the first person that they come in contact with is that you got outside in the lot. What will the security guard do? I guarantee you right now, if that happens and the security guard is there, security guard won't know what to do. He or she won't know what to do. They're going, well, I don't know who I call. Who do I call? Let me call the manager. And then what if ICE decides to go past them? So I think security guards need to be trained a whole lot more. We're paying for security at some companies, security guards, but we're not really getting the bang for our buck. I'm going to be actually traveling out to California next month to train security guards on being in-house security for a food plant, because that's an area that we're not really focused on or haven't been focused on, that we really need to train those individuals that's working as security at the plant. In addition to that, they will be trained on other things as well, such as large gatherings at your facility, things that they need to be aware of in light of some of the crazy stuff that's been going on lately.
Wow, that's a fantastic point, Rod. Thanks for bringing that up. And so in most plants, the security people are an outside agency too, right? So essentially, they're kind of like temp workers. They're contracted for these functions, and that person at your front gate may be there all the time, or they may rotate people out. That guard may have been guarding something completely different, a petroleum plant or something the week before, and now he's sitting outside a food plant. So you need to understand that. So you need to take a look at that. That's a really good point.
And no training. Those individuals have very little training when it comes to a food facility. They really do. They don't know much about our food. They know that maybe this is a particular plant, but other than that, they don't know anything.
Definitely. So you'd referenced, and I want to bring this up here too, as we're kind of back to the final 10 minutes here with our talk, is that you really need to look at best practices, and we've been kind of weaving these through this. So what are some of the things out there, Rod, that you've seen relative to our talk today that are just like that you really want to make sure people caught?
Again, the first thing is the first thing that I said when we started talking. Look at the whole ICE visit thing differently. Don't look at it negatively. Look at it positively. Reach out to ICE in advance of their visit, whether it's the state level, whether it's the local police, whether it's the federal government or the FBI or anyone from the Department of Homeland Security in your state. Reach out to these folks. Get to know who they are. They're human beings. And again, their goal, their responsibility is not to come in and shut your business down. That's not their goal. Their goal is just to make sure you don't have any folks working at the plant that could bring harm to us or bring harm to your facility or your people or your product. And how do you do that? By investigating who's working there and making sure we have proper documentation to identify who these people are. So that's the first nugget, I would say, the first takeaway, Brian. Make sure you work with these agencies. Number two, have that kit together like I talked about. Put that kit together in advance. Here are the folks. Have a criteria established. This could be a part of your food defense plan, though, too. Have a criteria established. These are the steps we take if we receive a visit from Immigration and Customs Inspection. A, B, C, D, E. These are the folks with the notifications that we make. This is their telephone numbers, those kinds of things. Number three, inform your employees that they can or that they cannot talk or should not talk or speak with anyone from ICE. You get that information, though, from your legal counsel at your company. Those are the main takeaways. And then get copies. I don't think I mentioned this, but this is really important, folks. Get copies of everything that they present you with. If someone comes to your door and says, I'm from ICE, I got a warrant to search your records, not a problem. They should have a copy for you by law, and this is just about everywhere in the United States. When you serve a warrant on someone, you have to provide them with a copy of what we call the four corners of that warrant, which will indicate everything in terms of what they can do, where they can look, especially if it's a search warrant. You rarely get a search warrant, look anywhere you want. You don't get that on the search warrant. It's very specific because it has to go before a judicial officer, magistrate, or a judge. And we like to call this the four corners of the warrant. So you have to spell out, need to look in the HR office, need to look in this office. It has to be specific. And those are the areas that they can look in. That warrant may not say they can look in individuals' lockers. It's not gonna be there's no such thing as a general warrant. Just go for it. No, you don't get those.
That's a really good point because part of it, right, is as people, we watch TV shows, so Law and Order or whatever else, and you see the people in front of the judge and they're getting a warrant, and people take that as the truth, and that's not necessarily it's fiction. So that's very good that you brought that out. Warrants are laser focused on what they can do. Mm-hmm. If it's not something they can do, that means they can't do it.
Right. Unless they get your permission. I kind of talked about that earlier. I said, be careful with giving consent.
Yes.
I mean, rarely will people give general consent. Yeah, just go for search it all. No, I don't know if you want to do that or not. So my whole point is work with law enforcement. You know me, I'm always going to be 100% behind law enforcement, but they're not going to do anything illegally. But that warrant, whether it's a search warrant, even if it's an arrest warrant, if they're looking for somebody, it's going to be very specific as to where that person is or what information they can actually take from that facility.
Right. And again, right. And I feel like I'm beating a dead horse here, but this is why this is so important to practice. So law enforcement may have a scope that they're allowed to operate in, but they're also very good at persuasion. So the story that always cracks me up is like you get pulled over for speeding. The first thing the officer says is, Mr. Reeler, do you know how fast you were going? Yeah, I'm sorry. I was speeding a little bit. What have you just done? You've admitted to a crime, right? Case closed, right? You're done, right?
Right.
They're asking these questions for a reason. So part of this is preparing, to your point, be cooperative, give them what they need. They're there to do a job and understand your roles and responsibilities in this as well.
and try to break the ice a little bit. I'm going to give you a real quick example with the traffic example you just gave. If I get pulled over by a police officer and the police officer walks up to the car and say, "Did you see that light, that red light that you just went through?" I'll say, "Yes, I did. What I didn't see was the police car."
Oh, nice.
So there you go. And then they kind of chuckle a little bit. You've broken the ice. So you don't have that tension there. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, to your point earlier, they're people too. And if you treat, it's like I pay your salary with my taxes. Yeah. Oh God. Yeah. You're going to end up on those videos on YouTube where they're hauling you off to jail in handcuffs because you're a jerk. So don't be a jerk.
Exactly. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, Brian, with the food industry, I think most of the people I know, and it's a lot of folks in the food industry, they all do the right thing. They all want to do the right thing. All of us want to do the right thing.
Yeah.
But let's lean on each other. Let's learn from each other. And especially when it comes to the I-9 inspections, just keep in mind, folks, there are really good reasons why some of these inspections take place. Go back to that report I was talking about earlier when I talked about that Homeland Security Threat Report. If you get time, just read through it. It's about a 28-page report, but it's really, really interesting. And if you read that, you're going to say, "Oh, now I see why they're doing these inspections." Because we know the reality is in law enforcement, we know that there's folks out here that's planning to harm us. And so we have to do everything we can do to try to identify these folks before they get that far.
Right. And the bottom line is this: we're all trying to mitigate risk, and it's food safety, security, all the things that we're talking about here today. And so this is something I've been diving into a lot, Rod, and I've been talking about here on the chat. And I'm absolutely amazed how many times risk assessment comes up because that's what we're doing. And so in a couple of weeks, I'll put in the comments here, I'm doing a webinar because enough people have been asking me, Rod, Brian, you keep talking about risk assessment. I want to learn more about this and how I can use this in what we do. I'm like, it's time for a webinar around this. So I'm going to do a webinar 2 weeks from last Tuesday. So coming up pretty quick, kind of going over the principles of risk assessment and what I think that we're really missing in food safety. So I put the invite in there for everybody. So if you can attend, I think it's really going to open your eyes, kind of like what we're going over here today. Part of this as well, too, Rod, is you've been busy. So congratulations. You have a brand new podcast, don't you?
I do. Every Monday at 11 o'clock a.m., the podcast comes out. My podcast on this Monday is going to be about vulnerability assessments and how to conduct vulnerability assessments at food plants. It's only a 30-minute podcast. Again, it's just information you can use. Hopefully you can use at your facility. So I have that podcast that just came out, Brian, and I'm also working on a book. On food defense, crisis management, and facility protection. It's going to be a very good, extensive book, which really dives into the various aspects of security at a food processing facility. That book will be released hopefully at the end of this year. It's also going to be a section in that book on SQF and food defense, which is going to be really, really good. So look out for that, folks, and hopefully you'll get an autographed copy.
I want one. So I put in the comments here, guys, a link to the webinar I talked about. I also put in a link here to Rod's inaugural podcast, your first episode. So everybody check that out. I've listened to it. Fantastic. And what's great about this, number one, as Rod said, it's a half hour. So you can find a half hour to listen to this. Listen to it in your car, right? You can listen to it on your way back and home from work, right? Listen to it. As you know, on these chats, every time I have Rod on here, it's an absolute fire hose of information. And these are all things that we need to know and do. So the other piece I wanted to say is writing a book, guys, is no easy task. It's hard writing a book. And I can only imagine for you, Rod, because you have such a wealth of information, trying to condense that down into a book and organize all of these different things, huge. So congratulations to you on that. I can't wait to see it.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Brian.
So, wow, we're almost out of time. We got 1 minute left here, Rod. Any closing thoughts you'd like to leave everybody with?
No, I just appreciate everybody, looking out for each other. I've said this for many, many years. When it comes to food defense and facility protection, folks, there's no competition. There's no competition. Whether you get your food defense training from us, AIB, FMI, SQ, it doesn't matter. Remember, at the end of the day, we all are in this together. And the goal is that we all produce safe food for our population. whether it's in the United States or around the world. And I think we can do that. I applaud everybody, Brian, in the food industry, especially the quality assurance managers. I mean, it's a hard job. Matter of fact, I think they need to be paid more.
Right.
But it's really a hard job. And there's so many things you got to do and focus on. So I really applaud everyone working in the food industry. And of course, I always like to applaud our military and our first responders for all that they do, folks. But again, as Brian alluded to earlier, we have to support them. They can't do it all. We have to be there to support our military and our first responders in doing our part in making sure we keep our facilities safe and secure.
Yep. So yeah, as they say, head on a swivel, guys. Pay attention.
That's right.
That's 90% of the battle. So with that again, so thank you, everybody. Fantastic chat as always. I always have such high expectations for you, Rod, and you always exceed.
Oh, thank you so much.
So thank you very much. And everybody, thanks for your contributions. And unfortunately, as we saw with Cortland here, tragedy often strikes close to home in those that we love. So hug your family.
That's right. Okay. Well, thanks again, Brian. I appreciate
it. We'll see everybody back here next Friday at the same time, 8 a.m. Mountain Time, 10 a.m. Eastern on LinkedIn and YouTube, where I'll bring another kick-ass guest like Rod on the show and provide just a ton of information. So have a great weekend. We'll see you then.
All right. Bye, everybody.